So around $150 to $250 price tag, there are a lot of really great IEMs, pretty competitive field as well, but some IEMs stand above the crowd. For example, the Moondrop Kato, the Yume Midnight, the 7Hz Timeless, and the Shore's S12. Now amongst those four, there's only one IEM that's tuned relatively neutral. What does neutral mean? Neutral basically means the most uncolored sound possible, right? Now the Midnight is not totally neutral in the mid-range, there's a little bit of warmth, but all in all it could be categorized as a neutrally tuned IEM. The Kato, the Timeless, and the S12 are not really neutral. The Kato has more warmth and more bass to it, while the Timeless and S12 are more V-shaped in signature, meaning that they focus more on the bass and the treble, and the mid-range has a little bit of a dip. The Yume Midnight is the only neutral style IEM within this price range that I know of, until the IEM that we're going to talk about today. Now this IEM comes from a brand that I had no clue even exists for the longest time, and these guys are the Rose Technics. I have three of their IEMs actually. I have the QT Pro2, QT7 Pro2, my bad, the QT9 MK2s, and the QTX, their newest flagship model. The one that is most interesting to me is going to be the QT9 MK2, so we'll be talking mostly about this one today. It comes in at $250, neutrally tuned IEM, good bass control, nicely energized upper mids to a relatively smooth treble with decent extension. Now this, I wouldn't say is a unicorn type of IEMs. I think tuning in the IEM world has gotten better and better and better over the years, to the point where neutral tuning is actually pretty widespread across a lot of price ranges. Even the lowest one, $50, $20 now have neutral style tuning. But this one in particular occupies a place in the market where neutral tuning doesn't really exist at a larger scale. Like I said again, only the Yume Midnight exists here. Hey friends, Tim here, welcome back to my video on Giz Audio. And of course today we are reviewing the QT9 MK2 and also going over the other two options in their lineup as well. Just cover the whole company, why not? Starting with the bass, I would say this one has a focus on the mid bass and the sub bass at the same time. Why? Because they're about even in those areas. The sub bass does have a touch of roll off. It doesn't hit the deepest it can possibly go, but that doesn't bug me in any way. The bass here actually feels really nice. The power can be a little bit lacking for those of you who love a lot of bass, but all in all, it's a nicely well done bass, nicely controlled, and also quite rich as well. It can come across quite large feeling, which is pretty satisfying to listen to. Now on to the mid-range. Like I said again, this thing has a really well-controlled bass. You won't get any bass bleeding into the mid-range at all, and that is the hallmark of a nicely tuned neutral IEM. We don't want bass bleed, we don't want bass bloat, we don't want warmth, we want nice, flat, and neutral, and that's what this thing delivers in the lower mid-range. It does have a little bit of a dip. It feels like it's not completely flat, but that's very forgivable because it is so little. Onto the upper mid-range, it has sufficient amount of energy. It's not the most forward or the most lively upper mid-range I've ever heard, but it has enough to never feel like it is under energy or the vocals feeling like it's in the backseat in any way. The vocals, the mid-range still pop out of the track just fine, though not the liveliest. I do wish it was a little bit livelier, but all in all, it's still natural and great sounding nonetheless. The treble area in this is actually nice. It's actually well extended. It has a little bit of peaks here and there, so some micro nuances will be highlighted or elevated. Now for those of you who are super sensitive to treble, those little peaks there might bug you, but for me, I find it rather smooth. Smoother than a lot of other IEMs I find on the market, while at the same time not being, again, just like the upper mids, not underpowered. You do feel some sense of sparkle, some brightness coming from this, and female vocals do shine through, and that's something that I'm actually pretty impressed about, because the treble area is notoriously the hardest part for IEMs to get right. There are so few of them that does treble extension well, give it enough of a sparkle, and not be completely destroyed in this area. And I would say that the QT9 MK2 is one of the better ones in this price range when it comes to treble. It's mostly smooth, it has nice extension, and also micro details are being highlighted in this set, and I cannot be more pleased. On to technical performance, detail, soundstage, imaging, and all that, right? So here's my scale. this thing lands right around, I would say, a little bit above the star field. Now, for the price that is at $250, to be around its area is actually good. It's not impressive, but it's not bad in any way. Soundstage wise, this has quite a nicely wide width, but not a lot of height or depth. I would say that's the biggest hindrance of this thing's detail performance, is that the height, the stage height is just a little bit, I would say low. It doesn't have the most airy presentation out there. The bass does hit low at times, but with the sub bass roll off, it doesn't hit quite the lowest. The most impressive part is the width of the stage. It does feel generously wide, especially for the price. Imaging wise, I would say is good as well. It's not impressive. It doesn't have pinpoint imaging or anything like that. Instruments do feel like they have their own little pockets and room, but the spaces between them can feel a little bit, I would say, too close. It doesn't have quite the smearing effect though, but it doesn't feel like they're super cleanly well separated. But again, at the price $250, don't mind it. So with all that being said, where does the QT9 MK2s actually compete in the market? I would say for $250, it competes with two IEMs. One is the Midnight, and the other one being a little bit higher than this price, the Mangird Tea that I reviewed a couple days ago. Now this for me sounds, tuning wise, sound better than the Mangird Tea. I find that this has more energy in the upper mids and the treble, and the bass is also, I would say, relatively same, well controlled. But since this has a little bit less bass than the Mangird Tea, the upper mids and the treble just shines through better for me, and overall delivers that really nice, smooth upper mids to treble experience I was talking about better than the Mangird Tea. I would say though that the Mangird Tea does have more depth in stage than this, but this is, to me, a step up in tuning, and between the Mangird Tea and this, I would pick this one. Now, how does this compare to the Yume Midnight? The Yume Midnight for me has more details. You can feel it in the stage height immediately with the Yume. The stage width, I would say the Midnight loses to the QT9, while the depth department, the Yume Midnight easily win. The bass on the Midnight hits deep, hits low, and it just sounds like it has more depth than the QT9 overall. In terms of tuning, some of you guys might actually enjoy the treble on the QT9 more than the Yume, because the Midnight does have some peaks that are quite audible, and those of you who are sensitive are not gonna like that so much. While this, even though this does have some peaks of its own, it comes across much smoother. Mid-range wise, I would say they're about even, and that's a tall order, to be about even in mid-range performance to the Midnight, because the Midnight probably has one of the best mid-range performance around the $200 price tag or so. Though, as you can see, this thing comes in at $250 and the Midnight is only $200, so if you want bang for buck, I would say the Midnight is still the better one for value. But if treble is a big thing for you, you want a smoother treble overall while still keeping that nicely neutral, natural mid-range tuning, then this is a good option. In summary, for me, the QT9 MK2 is one of those IEMs that impressed me. Not uber impressed me, but it impressed me enough for me to give it a full recommendation for the price tag that it's at. It is a really well-tuned IEM with decent amount of details. The stage width is also nice, and at the same time, I didn't touch upon this, it is comfortable. The IEM is tiny. Now, I should say that that can be a pro and con depending on who you are. If you're someone with smaller ears and big IEMs a problem for you, then this just might be the right fit. Now, this does have a shorter nozzle though. That's one of the downsides. It doesn't fit the deepest, but all in all, again, nicely tuned, smooth, easy to listen to set with decent details. $250. Easy recommendation. Now I'm gonna talk about the other two in the collection. Let's first talk about the QT7 Pro2. Now this is basically the QT9 MK2, but a little bit more V-shaped. The bass is more, it does bleed a little bit into the mid-range, giving it more warmth, and the treble area is not quite as even, not quite as satisfying as the QT9. This does come in at $110 though, but for me, that price range is even more competitive. The price ranges of $50 to $150 is a battlefield, it's a bloodbath. There's so many good IEMs there nowadays. And this thing, even though it's tuned relatively well, decent level of details for the price, it is, in today's market, quite outperforms. How about the flagship, the QTX or the QT10? Really little information is out here for this. When I first listened to this IEM, I thought the vocal experience was quite nice, it's quite forward, but at times it does come across like it's shouty or top heavy, and the bass always feels like it is shy or lacking overall. So the tuning on this is not nearly as balanced as the QT9. I much prefer the QT9 Mark II's tuning over the QTX. The one good thing about this is that it does have decent detail performance, especially for the price. It's $400, it's commanding a lot, but the detail level on this competes with the other IEMs around the price point, and that is probably the biggest selling point of these. So for now, when it comes to Rose Technics as a company, the only IEM that I'm impressed by and the only IEM that I suggest and recommend to you guys is the QT9 Mark II. It's competitive for its price, tons of good qualities, and all in all, just non-offensive. You'll find it very hard to find anyone that dislike this IEM or at least don't think that it's good.